Welcome, Spark. So what kind of Spark are you? Player? Creator? Or both? The stories yet to be told. The games to be made. Civilizations and societies to be formed. The universe is waiting for you to bring it to life. Now, how do we begin?
Hey there guys, you got Spark Brian here for another Tuesday education stream. I just have me today. Zach has come down with a bit of a fever, sickness, possibly flu, so we don't want him to infect anyone here in the office. This will be an interesting, fun stream. I'm titling this The Island of Misfit Tiles because there are certain code tiles that we've seen sort of underutilized that are very simple to understand and really powerful depending on how you use them. So I'm going to be going through a few different code tiles. Bit of housekeeping before we do that. On starting Thursday, we are going to do a bit of a feeds takeover in sort of conjunction with the Academy Awards, where all different kinds of movies that have been made in Project Spark, movies and animated shorts, are going to be taking over our featured feed because it's pretty amazing the amount of people who've made movies. So we're going to be doing that starting Thursday of this week. Additionally, next week is when Title Update 7 or version 1.07 of Project Spark comes out, which will have a lot of updates in it, and we're going to be talking about that more later on this week. So, during this stream, here are the different tiles that I plan to cover. I'm going to go through inventory and how to use that, and I'm actually going to create a pretty easy, simplistic inventory system that's actually basically almost a carbon copy of an inventory system that Mescad made previously in one of his amazing tutorials, one of his, 196 tutorials I think he has right now on YouTube. So that was one of them, and I'm going to be basically taking a leaf from his book with the inventory system that I make. So I'm going to be covering inventory. I'm going to be covering for each of and how to use that tile for a bunch of different things. I'm going to be covering the it tile and how to use that and everything around it. The name tile, what that means. Equipment, how to use that. The clamp tile, which is very useful, especially when you're increasing and decreasing numbers. And then I also got a request at the beginning of this for until and after, so I think I will, if I have time, I'll save that for the end. I'll also save, someone had requested depth of field, so I can touch on that at the end too. So the very first thing I want to talk through is just give you the basics of what inventory means in Project Spark, specifically in code within Project Spark. So I have this brand new character right here. Let's just go into my world. This is my little island, the Island of Misfit code tiles. And the first thing I want to do is I want to create a few different items here. And so one of the first things I want to do, and hey everyone for joining, hey WebbySimp, hey others, continue to ask me questions and make requests of this as well. So the first thing I want to do is in every weapon that you put in Project Spark, then you are going to have a default brain in there. And in this default brain, how it currently works is, you've probably noticed this, you've probably done this, you walk up to an item, you press B, and it's now equipped. So instead, let's just change one small thing here. On line 2, instead of it equip me, we're going to go out and we're going to go to inventory. And we're going to do it pick up me. And this adds this item to your inventory. I'm going to add in a few more items as well. Let's just zoom in here so that I can kind of talk through the inventory system and what really inventory means. Because for a lot of people, inventory might sound a bit scary, a bit daunting, but it's really not. It's very easy to understand. So we're just going to have 4 different weapons here. And I'm just going to copy this line of code into these 3 others. So instead of equipping these, you're picking them all up. All right, I'm also going to, just so you kind of get a visual representation of what's going on, I'm going to just add in here a little thing where I'm using for each of. We're going to get to what for each of is in a bit later, but we're going to say for each of inventory, which looks at everything in your inventory, and then we're simply going to display at screen bottom right. And we're going to say display it. And again, it is something I will get into as well. All right. So let's just go through here. Let's pick these items up. And so I'm picking them all up. They are not actually, I'm not actually equipping them, but you'll notice on the right-hand side of the screen, which you can see part of my face is blocking that, but for part of the right-hand side of the screen, you now see 4 different items there, the images of the 4 items that we just picked up. So the important thing with an inventory is, while these objects no longer physically exist in your world, they actually still exist. Everything you add to an inventory, that object still has a brain that's running. And that object still exists as just sort of hidden inside of your character. It's sort of like this character absorbed this object for now, and then they can use that object at any other point. So that's kind of the basics of the inventory system. And before I actually get to how to build an inventory system with the inventory tile, I'm going to have to go through a few different other underutilized code tiles that people haven't really explored to their fullest potential. And the first of those is for each of. So for each of, I had to use here to display everything that I had going on in my inventory. And the important thing with for each of is it looks at, for each of is kind of the start of something happening on the win side. Whatever you have after for each of, it looks at everything within there. So if you have an inventory, when you use for each of, that means for each of inventory is saying every single thing in your inventory, then it does something to every single thing in your inventory. So we might do, for instance, I have this unused player right here. I'm going to move him over here. He's just sort of my code reference in case I mess up big on live stream and have to reference him again. But he has a bunch of stuff going on in his brain. He has a inactive brain. But he is technically a player. For those of you who don't know, we have this player tile right here. This player tile refers to everything that has an input in your game. So these two guys are players, so they both have inputs. So I'm just going to show you sort of how different ways to use for each of. So you might do for each of player, then we can do display. We're going to use it again, and we're going to say above it. So you'll see that I have these 2 different guys who they both have control inputs, and they both are displaying the picture of themselves from your icon gallery in there. And so the important thing is the fact that when you have a set of objects, for each of looks through that entire set of objects. So that happens with inventory, that happens with player, that happens with an object set. But the other thing that no one's really utilized is what happens when you're doing that with just numbers. I'm going to show you what I mean. So we're going to grab a logic cube here. And actually, what I'm about to do is also, by the way, in the description tile for the for each of. There's some great use cases for this. But we're just simply going to do, in this logic cube, we're going to say once, and we're going to go for each of, then we're going to say the number 5. And what about a way to bring an object out of the inventory? That is something I will get to later. We have to kind of put a few pieces together for you to understand everything that's going on in an inventory so you have a really kind of robust understanding of it. So for each of 5, then we are going to do create, and let's create a bunch of acorns. So we're going to do just create acorn, and then after it does that, then this logic cube destroys itself. So what this actually does, for each of looks at whatever statement you have on the when side. So right here, the statement is 5. And what for each of now interprets is it needs to run this line right here 5 times simultaneously. What that means is it will spawn 5 acorns in one frame. That's the most important part. Is for those who've really messed around with Project Spark a lot, you'll probably notice that for each line, it runs usually once per frame. So if you just have a line here that just says, for instance, if you just put create acorn up here, line 1 will run once per frame. So every single frame, it will create a new acorn, which is 30 acorns per second, basically, because it runs at 30 frames per second. What this does for each of 5 would then create 5 acorns in that one frame. So that means you'll get 5 acorns per frame. So that's 30 times 5 per second. So that's a lot more stuff. And so I see some people in chat have used the numbering for each of, which is great. Some of you do know this, but a lot of people have. I've seen a lot of people place down like multiple logic cubes to spawn a bunch of things together in one frame. And it's something you don't have to actually do. You can run a bunch of stuff together. And did I remove? No. Yeah, I removed that. My game will not explode. It would have earlier, but now it won't. And so now you'll see that that logic cube has created these 5 acorns. Actually, in a very nice triangular format. It's pretty cool. So for each of basically runs through whatever's happening on the win side and looks at everything happening there. So whether it's a number, whether it's a set of objects, whatever is going on there. Next is what is it? So this has confused a lot of newer Project Spark players. Is what the heck is it? What does it mean? Let's define it. We'll do this with a few different ways. First thing I want to do is I just want to simply say when bump, then we are going to simply display it above. And now let's go ahead and test this. So let's walk over here. And so when I'm bumping stuff, you'll see that it appears above me, whatever I'm bumping. Let's just move over to the rocks here. And it looks like I'm actually bumping a mushroom right now. And then now I'm bumping a tree. So the important thing to understand about how it works is whatever in-world object you are referencing on the win side, that is what it is. It is just a shortcut to whatever's happening on the win side. So when you're sensing an in-world object, whatever you're sensing, that is defined as it. And we can look at this in different ways as well, where let's instead have here that I have to hold down on the, let's say, right trigger. So when I'm bumping something and now I'm holding down on the right trigger, display it above. And the reason I want to show you this is, let's move over here. So let's bump into my rock here. So notice nothing's displaying. Now I'm going to go ahead and press the right trigger. And now you'll notice it's starting to display stuff. So it looks at, this is how it looks at the very last thing that was sensed on the win side. So a button input is not an actual in-world object. That does not count as something that was sensed. Bump is looking for an in-world object, so that is something that is sensed. So whatever's happening kind of in here in the structure, whether it's in the parent line, child line, whatever's the last in-world sensed object, that is what it is referring to. If I now move this out here, so when right trigger, display it. So now I'm in the world, and let's hold down right trigger, and nothing's happening. And we're bumping into objects and nothing's happening still. And that's because now it is in its own parent line. There's nothing kind of hierarchically above it. And so because of that, it has no idea what it is actually. The last thing I want to show you with it, and this is something that a few different people have run into, some sort of things that they might be confused about, is let's instead look at instead of bump, we're going to look at nearest object. And we're going to create an object variable. So we're going to just call this closest. And closest is going to be equal to it. So based on your understanding of it, this means that whatever the nearest object is, that is what the closest, what this object variable closest now means. So I want to do in here just simply display it above. And now let's put this as a child line underneath of nearest object. Let's run this. And now you'll see whatever the closest object is, it's displaying that above me correctly. Cool. So that's working because that's a child line. I can now, because I've set closest object equal to it, I can now instead display closest object without having any child line whatsoever. And it runs just like it did before. And if I change it to it, as you probably expect, there's nothing happening on the win side, so nothing happens in my game. Now, let's look at the last sensor here, distance to. So say you want to only display an object once you're 10 meters away from it. So distance to closest, which is that object variable, is less than, let's say 10, then display it above. So what you might expect from here is, because it's referencing the closest object variable on the win side, then it's going to, then it is referring to the closest object. So let's run this. And what you're seeing is nothing is displaying at all. So why is that? The reason for that is you have to kind of think about the definition of sensors and what each sensor is sensing. So it can only function if the kind of dominant thing on the win side is actually referring to an in-world object. Distance to, that actually, it's not referring to an in-world object, it's referring to an in-world length. It's not referring to the actual object. And so because of that, when you are using the tile distance to, it doesn't have a reference anymore because it's saying, all right, I want to pull this object, which is the length, which is meters. This doesn't make any sense to me. Instead of, if I just simply say when closest, display it above, then now that is understanding that, okay, I'm looking for this object variable that is known as closest. So when you're working with things such as distance, then you want to make sure that in those cases, in order, or I want to do less than here, in order to have kind of things run properly, and I'm just going to pull this here, it will no longer work if you use distance to. There's a few other tiles that you'll find that kind of run this way, tiles that basically are not referencing in-world objects. Instead, you know, this is referencing the distance to an in-world object. So when you're looking at things like that, it won't work, so you're going to have to use something like an object variable. And Roding Woozy, in answer to your question, why don't it should be an interesting thing for you to test on what happens if you use OR on the win side with more than one potential object. I believe, so let's just have some fun. Let's just say when this tree, where is it? Or this sword, or the player. Let's see what is displayed on top of me. Oh, I didn't remove the other code. That is my bad. we want to do display it above. So you'll notice it's not displaying anything. And it's because it's very confused. That's the easy way of explaining it. So now if I just do win woodland tree, display it above, then it only displays a woodland tree. So if you have a lot of different objects on the win side, then it starts to get confused because you need to only be referencing, it needs to only be able to, at the end, pull one object. And if you're not giving sort of any preference or any weighting or any priority to what object it should refer to, then it'll just get confused and a lot of times won't run. So that is just something to be aware of. I think that's a lot about it. A lot about it. All right, so the one thing that is really, really awesome, and a lot of people haven't really been playing around with too much, is the name tile. And the name tile actually grabs the name of an in-world object. So I'm gonna rename sword to, I'm gonna call this awesome. This tusk I'm going to call tooth, and I'm just going to keep the other two the same. So let's do when I bump, then now instead of displaying the object, we are going to say display its, we're going to go over to this appearance area, and we're going to click on name, and do above it. So when you now bump something, it displays its name above it. Let's go into test. Let's see how this works. So I'm bumping this thing, and it's saying that this is an ancient Codian mace. It's saying that this is an ancient Codian sword. Let's bump into this thing. It's saying it's a tooth, because I renamed it to tooth. And this is renamed to awesome. And I can do this with every single object in the world. So I'm bumping into yellow-tip daisy, woodland fern, rock, tree, all that good old stuff. So by looking at the names of objects, this allows you to build UI a lot more easily. Like, especially if you can kind of remember the names of all the objects that are named in the world just by simply pulling the name tile, makes things a lot more interesting for you. It's a good, Rodin Ruzi does bring up a good point where name tile with multi-language does sometimes have issues. So that is a good thing to keep, to be aware of. And I would recommend, if you heavily use the name tile, then you'll want to custom name all of your objects just to make it so that multi-language issues won't crop up. So, for instance, this one you can just simply rename to, say, Codian Mace, and this one you might rename to Codian Sword. So custom naming all your objects in your world becomes a lot more useful. And not only for when you're in edit mode to actually display the names of the objects above them, but then you can reference those object names as well. So we are going to add another tile here that says when actually we're going to first look at nearest object, and then we're just going to create an object variable for that. So that's going to just be closest is equal to it. So now I can say that when this object variable's name is equal to Let's bring the text variable. Awesome. Then let's just play a bunch of explosions. We're just going to keep on playing explosions. So when the closest object is this awesome sword, then we're going to play a lot of explosions. So everything looks the same, and now this is the closest object, so it's just going to continue to have lots of explosions. And I can do that more frequently, so it's actually a huge amount of explosions. But the cool thing is you can, what I'm showing you is how you can actually check to see if the name of an object is equal to a text string. And currently you cannot rename an object throughout the game. Workaround for that is you can set a text variable to be equal to that object and then reset the text variable. So you can kind of update the text variable as you go along. But you can't actually update the name of the object itself. So we have all that down. You kind of see the benefits of naming and sort of being able to use all that stuff. So now it's time to put all this stuff together and let's create an inventory system. Let's create a pretty nice, robust inventory system. So the first thing I want to do is I want to use a new thing, well, new for some. We're going to call this current item. We're going to create a text variable called current item, and that is going to be equal to, let's go over to math, functions, clamp. So clamp is how you can, well, it sounds just kind of like you would assume. It clamps a number within a range. So if you clamp a number between 0 and 60, that means no matter what, if you try and increase or decrease that number, it'll stop at 0 and it'll stop at 60. So it gives kind of a maximum and a minimum that this number can run between. So what we're going to do here is we're going to set the clamp with a minimum of 0 and a maximum. So this is basically what we're doing is we're kind of setting how many, this number variable is going to be equal to kind of how many objects are currently in my inventory. So my maximum, I want to go over to the inventory tab, choose inventory, and choose inventory count. So that will look at the maximum as the actual number of items currently in the inventory, and that allows you to have as many items as you need. If you want to, say, limit the amount of items you can pick up in your inventory, then you could just set the max at, say, 5, and then you'd have to put a tiny bit of extra code on no longer add an item to your inventory once your inventory number equals 5. And then the important thing is at the end here, you want to re-add the number variable here. And the reason why is because basically you are saying that your number variable's clamp is now equal to a maximum and minimum of something. And you need to re-say that it's actually for this number variable, just to remind you. So that is clamping. We now next want to give me the ability to use left and right on the D-pad to cycle between my inventory items. So we're going to start with a very simple way of doing that, and then I'm going to iterate on top of that to make it a bit more useful and interesting. So I'm going to simply say, and by the way, this is also covered in our super user Mescads tutorial that he put out actually almost a year ago. Yeah, it's almost a year ago now that he put out his inventory system, and this is very similar to that. So when we do D-pad in the right direction, and when that is pressed, then we are going to take the current item number and we are going to increment that or increase that by 1. And there is a way, Amnesia, there is a way to make it so that an item can't go above or below a range without using clamp, and actually I am going to iterate on top with this specific thing here and show you how to do that. So if you want to know how to make an inventory without clamping stuff, then I'm going to show you that too. So we'll do D-pad in left direction. That would decrease the current item I'm on. So now let's make this useful within the actual inventory itself. So we're going to call for each of inventory. And again, as you will remember, for each of inventory then looks at every single thing that's currently in the inventory. Now is a new tile. And this is the current index. So the current index looks at where you currently are in your for each of loop. So it's looking where, what kind of number you're on within all the items in this list here. Because an inventory is basically a list of objects, right? So your current index is looking for your current place in that list. And that's really useful because then that allows you to kind of set that so you can change your current index and use that to pull out different items in your inventory. And so I'm going to say the current index is equal to the current item. I want these to be matching up as the same so that the current item can start being relevant to my inventory itself. And then I'm going to need a new object variable. I'm going to call this select me. As in this object variable, select me, and I'm going to set that as equal to it. Select me is now the thing that you can select because whatever index you're currently on, then that is the item which you will be able to do stuff with. So now I want to also just add in a quick line here because if you remember, I have a 0 here. I start at 0 and go all the way up to the maximum of my inventory. When I get to 0, when I'm at 0 in my index, that means I'm currently at nothing. So I just want to make sure that when the current item is equal to 0, then I'm properly saying that this object variable, select me, is now going to be equal to nothing. So it's now, I forget whatever last item select me was saved as. And now I want to do that when I press the right trigger, I'm going to equip stuff. But first, when you equip stuff, whatever you had currently in your inventory, you want to unequip it. So I want to create my inventory system so that I unequip whatever I currently have equipped. It's added back to my inventory. And then whatever I had currently selected, I then equip that. So I then pull it out of my inventory. So I am going to say that for each of my current equipment, so we're going to go here, go to equipment, then I'm going to unequip to inventory. And unequip to inventory takes it out and adds it back into your inventory. So we have this nice modifier to make it super simple to add something back into your inventory. And now I want to then equip. I want to equip my thing. So then I just go back into here, say equip whatever this select me thing is. And to make it more understandable what's currently going on, let's just add in a little bit of display. So we're going to use for each of again. We say for each of inventory, then we are going to display its name at screen bottom right, and we're going to say text size is going to be large. And above that, let's just put text that just says inventory. So we're going to display here. And we are just simply going to add in this. We're going to set that to screen bottom right also. We're going to set it to extra large font, and we are going to set its color to just say yellow, so that this is basically just a headline that says this is the inventory section. And based on how lines of code run, you will see how this looks. So let's pick up these items and add them to my inventory. And that's blocked, so you can't even see it. Okay. So I want you guys to actually see what's going on in the bottom here. So I'm going to instead set this to, you know what, I'm actually going to just turn off the screen around here so that you have, you can just see the full screen experience. And as Mescad said, you can also, you can unequip from a socket only instead of unequip from your entire body. And so that way you can say, you know, unequip from right hand, and that would be just your sword, and you keep your shield. So now you'll see I have this inventory list of items. And I can now, I'm now using the right and left D-pad, and let's press right trigger. And I now am holding an item. It's no longer in my inventory. It's now equipped. I then pick out another item. That's no longer in my inventory. You'll see Codian Mace is back in my inventory. So this is how you can kind of cycle between these items, and it will, you know, it'll pull out basically whatever you currently are selecting with your D-pad. But there's no visual indication of what item you're currently on. Well, I want you guys to see what I'm doing. That's why I turned off the frame around here. I can see what I'm doing, but my frame with my face made it so you guys couldn't see. So now I'm going to add a tiny bit more complexity here to make this just make this a richer experience of going through your selection process. So the first thing I want to do is, if you're just simply having kind of clicking on left and right on your D-pad, if that's cycling through everything in your inventory, then naturally when you get to the end of the list, it should loop back around on the list. I get kind of frustrated with simple inventory systems where it can't loop back on the numbers. So I'm going to do that right here. And this is where I'm kind of overruling clamp and looping stuff manually right here. So this, what I'm about to do is making clamp a bit unnecessary right now. So I'm going to say when my current index is equal to 0, then when my D-pad is pressed in the right direction, oh wait, I actually want to have this for left direction, because left direction goes down, right direction goes up. Okay, so let's just copy that line. So when my current item is equal to 0, that means I'm at the very bottom of the list. When I hit on the left direction, I should go all the way back up to whatever's at the top of the list. So I want to do here that current item is now actually, I'm just setting it directly equal to your inventory count. And your inventory count is going to be the very last item in your inventory. So the highest number in your inventory. So that loops it back around to the top of your inventory. And then you can simply just add in here, actually this doesn't need to be a child line under there, you want to add in an else. And as a reminder, else just basically says when, for this case, it would be when my current item is not equal to 0. So else always looks at whatever it's a child of, this is the else rule to that. This is the otherwise I do this. So when my current item is equal to 0, then when I hit down on the left pad, I go up to my top item. If it's not equal to 0, then like usual, I continue to go down by 1 point. On the other side of things, I want to put in here, let's just get rid of this stuff. when my current item is equal to the top of my inventory, so my inventory count, then I want it to loop around similar to what I did below. So I want to put in here that when I hit on the right direction, I now go all the way down to the 0 position, the very start of the list. And then we're going to add in just another else here that will make it so that when you're not at the very top of your inventory, you go up as normal. So those few lines I added right there, that now makes it so something can loop back around on itself. Before I show you that in action, though, I kind of actually want to show some visual indication of what's actually happening. So I'm going to add a bit more stuff to this display tile right here. So for each of inventory, then I want to say underneath, when I'm going to have to reference my old stuff over here. I thought I would get away with it, but I need to quickly reference something because I just want to make sure I get the exact syntax right. Because it's important to teach you guys while giving you perfect syntax. That is a very crucial part. Okay, I was correct in what I was about to do, but I wanted to make sure. All right, so let's go all the way back down here. All right, so I'm going to say that when select me is equal to it. The cheater copy. Yeah, I know. Sometimes you have to cheat with old code to make sure that your new code looks good. Never feel bad about reusing code. Always try at first to reuse code and just manipulate in new ways. All right, so when select me is equal to it, so basically whatever item in the inventory is currently the one that's saying to select me, I want to display its name, but I want to do it in a blue font so it shows sort of what's being selected currently. So I just add in to here color blue, and then I will just add right here that basically I'll just add an else here, so when it's another item, then it's not. All right, let's load up the inventory now. All right, so now you'll notice that whatever's currently selected, that's blue. But you'll also notice that every once in a while, nothing's blue, and that's when basically you have nothing selected. It's always nice to have, whenever you're creating an inventory system, it's nice to have a state where you kind of unequipped everything and you have nothing. So, for instance, we have this mace equipped. Let's just go down until nothing here is blue. Let's equip that, and now nothing's equipped. It's nice to have that nothing state because sometimes you just want a player to. Sometimes a player wants their info to just say nothing. So let's add in something else here. So we are going to first say that when my inventory count is equal to 0, I want to just display the fact that your inventory is empty. So let's just display, I think I saved this text earlier. Let's just say, yep, display empty. We're going to do that at that same screen position. And we're going to make that large font. Okay. So now this will make it so that if you have nothing in your inventory, underneath the inventory it says empty. So now we want to have, actually let's copy this. So basically, the only time when you're selected on kind of nothing, that's when your current item is equal to 0. The current item you're on is equal to 0. That means you have nothing selected. So in those cases, we want to display right here. I'm going to call this, I'm just going to call this nothing. And we're going to make that blue. And now we're going to add another line at the very bottom here. When my current item is not equal to 0, and I display nothing without blue. And due to the fun ordering, oh, right. Okay, I'm going to fix that. That's right. Because if I have nothing equipped, then it'll still show nothing. So, you know what? I don't need this line right here, line 18. I was thinking about doing something with that, but I don't really need it. Okay, so inventory currently says nothing. So now when you are switching between all the different things, then now when you're selecting nothing, then nothing is now blue. And when you're selecting other things, then that is now blue. And it's nice to kind of cycle between all the different things. So that is, in a nutshell, the inventory system shown to you with excruciating detail so that you can understand all of the different components that made it up. And you can really iterate on this. You can do a lot with this. You can actually make your own custom UI for this. The core ingredients is you just need to know what you're currently selecting, how many things are in your inventory, and what the names of all the items are. That's all you really need to do. So because we have a few more minutes, let's talk about a few other things. And while I'm doing that, let me know in chat if there's any other tiles you kind of would like some more descriptions around or would like to understand a bit better. I'm going to quickly show you the until and afterwards tiles. And whenever I'm testing stuff, or showing kind of the concept of things, I always like to have something constantly jumping until something happens. So I'm adding in this line right here, where until the right trigger is pressed, I will continue to jump. Actually, I already have right trigger mapped, so let's do left trigger. So I've not pressed the left trigger. Because of that, I will continue to jump in this world. Because it is looking for, until I've done something, I will continue to do this line. So as soon as I press left trigger now, I will no longer jump. This thing has now happened, and no matter what I do in the world, this win side has come to pass. Pressing on the left trigger has come to pass. So it works. It works actually pretty similar to a once tile, where it's sort of, there's not really much of a way to reactivate it. So something will continue to happen until you do the one thing on the win side. The flip side of that is the after tile. And after looks at you only start to run this win tile after, or the do tile after this win side has happened. So right here, you'll notice I'm not jumping whatsoever because I haven't pressed the left trigger. As soon as I press the left trigger, I will now continue to jump. It will continue to run. There's nothing I can do to stop it from running. Besides, there's obviously a lot you can do through additional coding by page switching or stopping the brain or stopping executions. But just by itself, whatever's happening on the do side will now continue to run or not run based on you hitting until or after. I saw someone asking about how to create sort of a character selection screen. That we will cover in a future tutorial. That is going to need its own thing. I mean, the inventory system, I did go into excruciating detail, but it did take 45 minutes to get through every single thing leading up to creating an inventory system, so I just don't have enough time to really show you a character selection screen. But I know a few people have asked that, so it's something we will do. Let's see, what else? I have seen a few requests for camera stuff. And I did see specifically someone ask about depth of field. I also saw someone ask about camera settings. So I'm not sure if they were talking about within, let's go all the way down here. Let's go to the follow camera. So I'm not sure if they were talking about kind of all the different modifiers you have with camera settings and what all those mean. Probably going through every camera setting is something I feel like we should spend another stream on, because there's a lot of stuff you can do with cameras. You can really, the camera system has been set up so you can create whatever type of game you want to. Really, I'd say probably 75% of your game type is actually whatever camera angle you set your game at. A 2D side-scroller will be to the side of you. A top-down shooter will be on top of you. A third-person adventure will be a follow camera you can rotate around you. Your sort of Gears of War over-the-top shooter would be a first-person camera that's kind of attached to you that's at a specific point. First-person shooter is obviously a first-person camera. So setting up a camera is really crucial. So we won't really cover that, but I do want to just show you some things with depth of field. Because, so the variables. All right, that's something else. Camera variables is something else we'll cover. Let's go ahead and also let's add back in. Let's add me back in. And did I remove my camera? Did I delete that? I did, didn't I? Yeah, I deleted my camera. All right, let's add my camera back in. All right. We don't want it to be a fixed camera. We want it to follow camera. So depth of field is awesome. Depth of field is really awesome. Depth of field allows you to make really cool looking levels. If you want your level to have the additional polish, play around with depth of field. As you'll notice, things in the distance are kind of blurry. And the reason why is depth of field gives a sense of things in and out of focus. There's a lot of different modifiers you have with depth of field. So let's first start with the near blur depth. The coolest thing, and actually let's set the follow camera to be super close to you. So let's set the minimum distance, or sorry, I want to set actually the maximum distance to be, let's make it super low, something like 2, which is 2 meters. So that's super close to you. Cool, so that's close. So now I want to do near blur depth, and let's set this to a space of 2. Depth of field should not really affect performance. Should have little effect on your performance. If it has a huge effect on your performance, then that is probably something else going on. So I'm trying to get it so that right along the edge of my depth of field is when things start to go blurry. I think I overdid it there. No, I just about did it. So a really cool thing to play around with is, especially if you're using follow cameras, let's set this down by just 1. When you're using follow cameras, a really nice effect is when things that are really close to you, they kind of have this blurred out effect as well. So it looks like they're kind of out of focus. Something like this. So this nice blurred out focus of things that are sort of too close to you makes it feel more cinematic, makes it feel sort of like a movie following you along with you, because, you know, when you think about cinematic shots, most things have a single focus. So this is just a nice, easy way to give you sort of a cool looking focus It can really look spectacular when you use it a lot. So you can also then set far blur. So I like to usually set my far blur as super far away, but let's just make it really close, just for fun. Set the far blur as 15, and that means that everything more than 15 meters away is going to be out of focus. Actually, let's make that super small. Let's make that like 3. All right, so we set it to 3 meters. And one thing that some people sometimes have trouble with is, like, if we set it down to 1 meter away, you would assume that the far blur depth kind of just starts right there around you. When actually what's going on is you have another variable set. So you'll notice that your far blur depth seems further than 1 meter away. And that's because we have this other variable here that is known as the focal depth. And this focal depth is, the description actually sums it up pretty well. It's where your near blur field ends and your far blur field begins. And there's a default setting there, kind of a negative space between those two, where nothing will be kind of blurred in that space. So in order to change that, if we just do focal depth of, let's say, 1, then now you'll notice that it's now just 1 meter in front of me is when things get blurry. So that's how you can play around with making it so that things kind of right in front of you are blurry. You can even go with like negatives, so things even behind you are blurry. But that is kind of this transitional space between when your near fade ends and your far fade begins. Trying to think of what else. I think like we're right on the hour, but I hope this helps uncover some of those tiles, which are really simple to understand, but I think people may not have just had the context of all the different ways to understand them. And yeah, focal depth depth of field really do think of it as just your far blur amount and your near blur amount, and the amount of space it takes for things to be blurry close to you and blurry far away from you. It's something that I strongly recommend everybody play around with that in your levels. Some levels it won't make sense in. For some of them, like, for instance, a lot of my levels I set the far blur as, say, 200, near blur is 4. So that like only very distant objects are kind of blurred out, because if everything's kind of blurry, it makes it not as nice. But a near blur amount is very nice and can really help kind of sell the cinematic experience that you're working with. And I think that'll about do it. I hope that kind of got around to some unanswered code questions, some unanswered tiled questions from people. I would recommend tweet at us, let us know if there are other certain general code tiles you just don't really know much about. You don't really know how useful they are, what you can use them for, because everything has a super powerful thing that you can do with it. Every single code tile you can do to make to be basically the central point of whatever game you're trying to make. That's the really important part. Is the more you experiment with each code tile, the more you'll find that you can build an entire experience around that and make that kind of the integral point of your experience. And so I think that will about do it. We have our Thursday stream at 3 p.m. Pacific time, and we will actually be covering on a Thursday stream something fun, something very fun. So make sure to tune in for our Thursday stream for a very cool thing that we will be talking about. And also every Friday we do our streams at 11 a.m. So thanks everyone. This will also go up on YouTube for people who may have caught it at the halfway point within 24 hours. And I will see everyone again on Thursday.